You know, a few weeks ago, I traveled all the way up to Cornell. And I thought I'd get more of that kind of crazy welcome at Cornell than I would here. But I didn't. Cornell and Vanderbilt, however, do have something in common. What they have in common is that they have both been at the center of widely reported racial hate crime hoaxes. Kind of a dubious distinction to have, but they both have it. Cornell was the site of the most infamous campus hate crime hoax probably ever. This was 50 years ago when black activists burned a cross in front of their own student center to justify a takeover of a building, an armed takeover with rifles. At Vanderbilt, the racial hate hoax took place in the less distant past. Some of you might remember it. It was 8 years ago, 2015. The national headline said that there was a racial hate crime consisting of a bag of excrement discovered on the footsteps of the Black Cultural Center on campus. A black student group called Hidden Doors quickly denounced the unsavory bag as a vile act. They claimed, quote, "The violation of a place that in many ways is the sole home for black students is deplorable. As many of us sit in grief, recognize that these types of actions are what we speak of when we note the reality of exclusion and isolation of students of color, specifically black students on campus. As we announced yesterday and reaffirmed today, we will not be silent." They are never silent. You can call the left-wing activists a lot of things. Silent is not one of them. Now, unlike at Cornell in the 1960s, Vanderbilt in 2015 had security cameras all over the campus. When the university police checked the security camera footage to investigate the alleged hate crime, they discovered that no such crime had occurred at all. Instead, a blind student had used a baggie to clean up after her guide dog. And then, because she was not aware of where all the trash cans were on campus, because she was blind, she left it on a stoop and decided not to bring the bag with her into the building. This incident is an almost perfect analogy for modern racial grievance. The only way it could have been more perfect would have been if she had cleaned up after her bull instead of her dog. But it was pretty close. It was pretty good. In any case, I did not come here tonight to talk about excrement. Bovine, canine, human, any of it. I came here to talk about a deeper issue at the heart of so much racial debate, and that is colonialism. The activist left, from Hollywood to the newsrooms, especially on campus, has spent nearly 2 months now smearing all of history's victors as colonizers, settlers. The reason for this uptick in anti-colonial rhetoric is Hamas's current war with the State of Israel, which the left has accused of engaging in settler colonialism. The most prominent defense of the modern Israeli state thus far has been to deny its status as a settler colonial entity. This, I believe, is a bad strategy for a few reasons. First, because the Israeli state manifestly is a settler and colonial endeavor, deriving from the Balfour Declaration of the British Empire during World War I, after which the Brits wrested the territory from the Ottoman Empire. Two, more relevant to all of us, because our own nation is similarly a settler and colonial project deriving from the Treaty of Paris, in which also the British Empire recognized the United States as an independent nation. Three, because all regimes in history have been established by settlers and colonizers of one kind or another. Not since Adam in the Garden of Eden have any people sprouted out of the ground. And Adam, you might recall, had a little bit of help in the process as well. Borders, nations, regimes have changed for all of history as people have multiplied, shrunk, and moved around. The aim of the decolonization activists is to return land from the people who currently possess it to the people who previously possessed it. That does not seem to me to solve the problem. That seems only to push the problem a little bit further back in history. In 1980, the US Supreme Court ruled that the American government had illegally taken the Black Hills of South Dakota, the site of Mount Rushmore, from the Lakota Sioux. The court ordered the government to pay the Lakota the initial offering price of the land, plus interest, coming out to a total of $106 million. The U.S. had pledged in the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 to set the Black Hills apart, quote, for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians, thus ending Red Cloud's War. 6 years later, however, General Custer entered the Black Hills amid reports of gold that was found there. And after Custer's reports came out, there came the settlers. They were enticed by Cutler's reports of the land and the resources to be found on the land. Now, initially, the U.S. military tried to stop the settlers. They wanted to honor the treaty. But the settlers kept coming. So President U.S. Grant told the military to stand down and stop opposing the settlement. Eventually, with so many Americans on the land, the U.S. government decided the only way to avoid another war was to buy the land from the Lakota Sioux. Negotiations broke down. General Custer led a charge. Some of you who took history classes might remember the charge did not go very well. He was opposed by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. They defeated Custer at the famous Battle of the Little Bighorn. The victory did not last long. The Americans quickly defeated the rowdy Sioux, and still the Sioux refused to surrender. But the Sioux also didn't have any means to survive. They had been stripped of their weapons and their horses. So in 1876, Congress made aid to the Sioux contingent on their ceding the land to the United States, finally putting an end to the problem. Some Sioux leaders agreed to a settlement, but not enough to satisfy the requirements of the Fort Laramie Treaty, which led to the Supreme Court case a century later. The liberal Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Sioux in 1980 over the objections of the conservative Justice William Rehnquist. Notice, however, the court did not say that the U.S. government had to give the land back to the Sioux. That would have been insane, for one, and it would have been completely impractical. 250,000 Americans lived on the land. It was American land. 4 U.S. presidents have their faces carved into the side of the mountain. The land is not going back anytime soon. Even the Sioux did not accept the decision. They had not waited over 100 years to accept what they considered to be blood money for stolen land. By 2011, the settlement was valued at over $1 billion. The Sioux still would not accept it. I might have caved a little bit. $1 billion, I might have said, okay, you can have the mountains. Today, can you imagine? That was 2011. Today, that number is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 gazillion when you factor in Joe Biden's inflation. Still, the Sioux, they hold firm. They won't accept it. It's a lucky thing that they won't, because the settlement would raise just as many problems as it solved. The reason for that is that the Lakota Sioux did not magically sprout out of the Black Hills of South Dakota. In fact, the Lakota Sioux only possessed the Black Hills for about 100 years. Less time, in fact, than the United States has possessed it. The Lakota only acquired the Black Hills in 1776, and the way they acquired it was by moving in from Minnesota and conquering the Cheyenne. So should the U.S. government pay $1 billion to the Lakota because we took Lakota land, or should we pay $1 billion to the Cheyenne because the Lakota took Cheyenne land? Well, hold on. Hold on just a second here. I think you probably see where this is going. The Cheyenne, it turns out, they did not sprout out of the ground either. The Cheyenne only moved in during the 18th century. Before that, the land had belonged to the Kiowa and the Crow. Before the Ojibwe Indians started taking land from the Lakota, impelling the Cheyenne to start taking land from the Kiowa and the Crow, before the Lakota came in and took the land from the Cheyenne, before the U.S. took the land from the Lakota. Wow, I'm dizzy. How exactly do the anti-colonial activists suggest that we decolonize the Black Hills? I'm not asking this just to own the libs. I think the libs have all been escorted out of the lecture hall. I'd love an answer. I would love an answer. I'm all ears. We're going to have a long Q&A. If anyone has an answer to how exactly we're going to decolonize that land, I'm open to it. What are we supposed to do? The right of conquest has been a universally recognized principle of politics everywhere on earth for all of human history until about 70 years ago, when liberal utopians pretended that a couple of UN declarations could fundamentally change politics and human nature and freeze history in place. Today, we are witnessing in real time the futility of such pipe dreams. Put the current war in the Middle East aside. This is the time of year that the issue of decolonization often crops up. And that is because we've just celebrated Thanksgiving. Some of us have celebrated Thanksgiving. I have celebrated Thanksgiving. Some people don't. You don't like that lady in the front row. She doesn't like Thanksgiving. There's at least one more left in. The people who left this room, I think, don't celebrate Thanksgiving. I do. In fact, I celebrate it for a personal reason, which is that a number of my ancestors were present on the Mayflower and therefore at the very first Thanksgiving. This would not be on the Italian side of my family, which my mother used to say came here on a sardine boat, but on the English side of my family, they made it on the Mayflower. One of them was a pilgrim, first doctor in Plymouth, Dr. Samuel Fuller. The other ones were considered somewhat less upstanding in the colony. One of my ancestors, John Billington, is the first man executed for murder in the Plymouth colony. His friend, Francis Eaton, was a man with a lot of financial problems. He died a debtor. And then my final Mayflower ancestor, Stephen Hopkins, was so infamous a mutineer that his shipwreck around Bermuda on the sea voyage served as the basis for Shakespeare's Tempest. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag with the ancestors. Does that mean that I will disavow my ancestors? No, far from it. I actually just launched a cigar company in honor of my ancestors called Mayflower Cigars. Oh, thank you. I see a cigar in the front row from my friend. I wish that I had some Mayflower cigars for you all. We actually sold out in the first day. We had a 4-month stock. Oh, thank you. It was 30,000 cigars. We sold out in the first day. In any case, how did I get on that? Oh, right. I don't disavow my ancestors. That's how. And I don't disavow my biological ancestors for the same reason that we should not avow our political ancestors. Men such as Christopher Columbus, the founding fathers, all the great men who built our nation. Namely because without them, we would not be here. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and the stupid ones among us think that they are flying. Why did our ancestors, literal and political, settle this land? Why did they colonize this far-flung place? The decolonization activists will tell you they did so for material plunder. As usual, these liberal accusations are in fact confessions. The libs are projecting, as they often do. Having adopted the fashionable materialism of modernity, these leftists cannot even imagine that one might be motivated by higher ideals. But in the case of the great men of history that we are discussing, Columbus, the Pilgrims, the Founding Fathers, they were. And the proof of that is that none of them got particularly rich for their troubles. In fact, most of them were personally impoverished. Christopher Columbus was never paid what he was owed by the Spanish crown. In fact, part of the reason they accused him of all sorts of bogus crimes is to get out of paying him what he was owed. That's a lecture for another day. Inasmuch as Columbus did undertake that perilous voyage for wealth, he did so in order to fund a crusade to retake the Holy Land, as Carol Delaney details very well in her book on the subject. The Pilgrims of the Mayflower gave up not one but 2 lives of relative comfort, one in England and another one in Leiden in the Netherlands, which was their adopted home. After they got to America, half of them died before the first winter was through. George Washington lost half of his net worth in the Revolution. John Adams faced major financial problems throughout the war, problems that he could have fixed had he not continued to serve in the Continental Congress. Thomas Jefferson died a debtor, and that debt grew in large part due to his 40 years of public service. For virtually all of history, everywhere on earth, mere acquisitiveness sufficed to justify wars of conquest. But ironically, the men that the leftists call thieves and plunderers were all motivated by higher ideals, up to and including the highest ideal of all, religion, the worship of and service to God. The settler-colonial dispute in the Middle East today is obviously religious, just as the settling of America was religious, just as all human conflict, to cite Cardinal Manning, is ultimately religious. Sometimes the religious tenor of these conquests led to gross injustice, as we see in the case of the Aztec Empire, which sacrificed the peoples that it conquered to the demons that it worshipped. Just 5 years before the supposedly evil colonizer Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Aztecs sacrificed more than 80,000 people at the consecration of the Temple of Tenochtitlan over the course of just 4 days. Hernan Cortez, another supposedly evil colonizer, witnessed these precise sorts of sacrifices when he arrived in 1521 to the capital of Tenochtitlan, where the Aztec priests sliced open the chests of sacrificial victims and offered their still beating hearts as a sacrifice to the demons before tossing their dead bodies down the steps of the temple. Not very nice. You would not like that kind of colonialism. Now, happily, Cortez conquered the Aztecs. He stopped the human sacrifice, he ended the demon worship, and he introduced the natives to Christianity. All good news. The liberals consider this a very bad thing. The liberals don't seem to have much of a problem with demons. They even speak like demons, the way they use these pronouns now. My name is Legion, for we are many. There are a lot of eerie similarities. They don't seem to have a problem with it. They dress up like demons at concerts, all the weird Sam Smith stuff, you know? They do all these kinds of strange New Age rituals with the crystals and the woo-woo, you know? It's weird. It's weird, man. They don't have a problem with that. They don't have a problem with human sacrifice either, as shown by their now sacramental stance on abortion. But those of us who oppose human sacrifice, be it on the demonic altars of Tenochtitlan or of Planned Parenthood, tend to consider the end of Aztec rule to be unambiguously a positive development. There will, after all, be conquest. People will grow, shrink, and move. So if there will be conquest, it seems preferable that such conquest be Christian rather than demonic. The kind of imperialism that builds Santa Croce rather than Tenochtitlan. The sort of conquest that teaches people to love their enemies rather than to rip their hearts out. An additional advantage of Christian conquest is that it imposes certain restrictions on the conquerors. Unlike many other religions, notably Islam, Christianity has almost never spread by the sword. I say almost because there are 2 exceptions to that. In the case of Charlemagne, who I will note had a theological advisor, Alcuin of York, who urged him not to spread the faith by the sword, and also later on in Spain. But the reason that Christianity has virtually never spread by the sword is because of this fun fact about Christianity, which is that for a conversion to be valid, it has to be undertaken freely. The early Christians made disciples of all nations not by threatening to kill them, but by being killed themselves. Hence Tertullian's observation in the 2nd century that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Throughout the ages, the church consistently insisted upon protections for conquered and colonized peoples. When the conquistadors got a little bit high-handed with the natives in the early 16th century, Catholic missionaries complained to the Pope, Paul III, who issued the apostolic brief Pastorale Officium, reminding the conquistadors that the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V had already forbidden the enslaving and robbing of the natives, and further threatening anyone who continued to transgress with the ultimate punishment, which would be automatic excommunication. It is ironic that the decolonization activists focus their ire exclusively on the West, what was once called Christendom. Not only is the West not uniquely or even especially responsible for the evils of conquest, the West, in fact, has been uniquely innocent of the crimes associated with conquest. If the growth, shrinking, and movement of peoples is inevitable, that is to say, if conquest is an inescapable fact of politics, then who would you rather be conquered by? Would you rather be conquered by Christians or Aztecs? Christians or jihadis? Christians or atheists? We haven't even touched on the atheists yet, the atheist regimes which are responsible for the worst crimes associated with conquest in the 20th century. I sometimes tell critics of Christian nationalism that if they think Christian nationalism is bad, just wait until they see unchristian nationalism. The same is true of settlement, colonialism, and conquest. If you believe that the Western kind of conquest is bad, just wait until you see all the other kinds.